Well, I mean, the far right, or some extent, the far right increased in the United States under this period you might want to call the alt-right, or an alt-right labeling. And that's where you have this meteoric rise from 2015 until 2017. And now, a lot of those people have just left the internet. Some of them are only posting on user sites of really limited bases, such as like BitChute or Odyssey, or, TRS outright walling itself off with paywalls. And now it looks like, because a lot of those alt-right people, they started being exploratory and trying to read things, but ultimately they ended up going down kind of like this, more cool bro version of like skinhead white nationalism. And they didn't really examine how power worked, or, higher philosophical understanding of the world, or higher political science understanding of how things really work. And it is really just kind of, white nationalism, like skinhead white nationalism from the 80s and 90s, but with like Disney parody songs. So now it looks like there's kind of like this renaissance of these neo-reactionary channels on YouTube, and people, pushing more of the neo-reactionary message. And it's gotten all the way to the point where Mencius Moldbug was on Tucker Carlson. So neo-reactionary was, growing before you had the explosion of the alt-right. And now it seems to be that the alt-right has walled itself off or exploded onto e-drama. The neo-reactionaries are coming back. And, the neo-reactionary kind of worldview is always like, hope is lost. The left wing is invincible. Cthulhu is always like unstoppable, and he's always swimming slowly to the left, and it's just this endless ratchet where we can never win, right? And overall, I guess in 2021, the world seems like a pretty dark place. We got Biden's very, 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 very apparent victory. I guess censorship has slided downward, because it seems like my channel is able to gain subscribers. Argent's gaining subscribers again. People are at least able to use YouTube as a trailer channel for BitChute or for Odyssey. Twitter restored people, but overall it's not like it was before Trump was elected. Definitely censorship is something that we should expect going forward in the future. The normies didn't really get woken up. They're still just regular Republicans, and the regular Republican Party is pretty much still around. And most of his modest proposals never even saw the light of day in the 4 years he held office. And basically it seems like the United States is transferring into some kind of like dictatorship like South Africa or Venezuela or something. So, pretty dark. Now enter this really minor YouTuber, this Serp Kerp guy. Early on I used to like push forward third positionism and neo-fascism. But eventually, my content took a radical turn, and I started to have things that were kind of like incongruous with the rest of all these far-right posters, as I started to accept like the limits to growth and collapsology. And this became my main hermeneutic of viewing the world and trying to understand what's going on. And I began to talk not just about race realism, but peak energy, dysgenics across all races, and like a Malthusian trap or catastrophe. And this essentially is eclipsed. I'm still blasting that sick-ass Marshall industrial beat, and I'm still sympathetic towards, that worldview, but really it kind of eclipses anything, because that worldview and that political system would be just as fucked under, collapsism, under Malthusian trap, and under the dysgenics. I don't really see how there's all these things that ultimately would be almost insurmountable and crushing it, just as it would be crushing global capitalism. So many others on the far right, they kind of see my views as perplexing. Many believe that this collapse I would be talking about would be preferable and to the continued advance of technology and degeneracy, and that indeed technology is growing without any kind of break or stagnation or diminishing returns. So something which I viewed as dark and depressing to me, to other people often seems optimistic or some kind of wish fulfillment. Many other people believe that the elite have a coherent worldview and that they're incredibly competent. And a lot of the neo-reactionaries believe that. They work towards a one-world state, and this is not necessarily neo-reactionary. This is more of the New World Order kind of conspiracy. They're working towards this one-world state where nationalities would be erased and, numerous necessities inherent within humanity are basically going to be eclipsed. Live in the pods, eat the bugs, don't get married, don't have kids. The idea that they would just let everything fall through out of negligence or their own stupidity doesn't even register in these people's minds, where to me it's obvious that that's what's going to happen. They view the elites as just super competent, hyper capable, and other people who are accelerationist, something I've condemned, want to push the system purposely towards destabilization, and they're confused that I would push back against purposeful accelerationism and trying to collapse the system. So again, overall, I just really see accelerationism is unnecessary, and that the idea of this competent elite, either by conspiracy or by emergent means, having pushing the world towards this slave state of living in the pods and eating the bugs is absurd, and that really things are just falling apart, and they're falling apart faster and faster and faster. That's how I view the world. I'm going to start out with talking about why I condemn and why I think accelerationism is stupid. And I've really never been shy about condemning accelerationism. And that's accelerationism in this context is the idea that rapid change for the worse should be promoted in order to destabilize the system and ultimately collapse it. And that somehow if the system is destabilized, then radical ideologies will be given more credence, and they'll be able to have some kind of real chance to come to power. And part of this idea is that if traditional political circles continue, then it would normalize the Great Replacement, the mainstreaming of homosexuality, veganism, all these other things slowly, incrementally over time. And if you push them, give them more power, then all these people that just go about their normal day are just going to be perking up their ears and being like, what the fuck is this? And people's anger and alienation would be somehow not diffused and would push them as a kind of this mass movement because of their, the frog boiling thing, where the frog doesn't notice how bad things get if it's slow over time, and that if you just boiled them and you just shoved all this fucking trans shit on top of them and all this bullshit, that they would just leap out of the pool and, rise up and fight the system, join in and fight for some kind of white ethno-state or something stupid like that. Thus, the proponents of these radical ideologies would further the demise of the system by actively supporting things which would destabilize it and purposely trying to make things worse. Firstly, on a very basic ethical ground, you can't actively do evil to make good. It just doesn't work. You can't justify consequentialism ever. It's a horrible, horrible set of reasons and ideas to try and shape your morality, and it's just gonna result in some pretty bad stuff. Very basic misunderstanding of how ethics and morality works. So if you support somebody like Yang, and the Yang actually got in, and you did this all for these consequentialist reasons to collapse the system, when you're working towards a goal, this is kind of virtue ethics, when you're working towards this goal, you can't do so cynically. In fact, I would argue that nobody works towards any goals cynically, or even maybe minutely cynically at first. But you can't push towards the meaning of your life and all your actions and everything you're doing cynically. That will just eat itself away and eclipse itself, erode itself, and then you get this neo-sincerity, right? All these hipsters dressing up like retards, but eventually they think looking like a retard looks cool. They did it for irony first, but ultimately you become neo-sincere and you like what you're doing. And that's this inescapable trap that all humans are doing. All humans have to do, and the very universe runs under or after. So for instance, on this channel, when I was doing the flag vids, sometimes I would be too sympathetic, to be honest, and take it too far. And I would become too engrossed with the Soviet Union and how they combated kind of the original version of neoliberalism. And it was kind of this irony was making me neo-sincere and pushing me more and more towards accepting Marxism-Leninism. And some people in that I knew online more personally than average commenters were like, what's happening to you? Why are you saying such stupid things? And that was happening to me. It's like, you know, you can't look at dick girls, right? If you look at traps, it's going to turn you gay. Because you can't do anything, ironically, continually without wanting to do it. You'll either stop doing it out of disgust and you won't commit to it. And if you do commit to it, you will become sincere in it. And that's a general law, really, that works. So any kind of accelerationism you do, anytime you're going to push leftism, it's going to make you into a leftist. And really, to me, it's just completely pointless because ultimately the system does not need any help making it decline and collapse. And I'm actually going to borrow Marxist terms here. You know, I was just talking about how I almost got dragged into Marxism-Leninism. There has always been this element of me to where I read Marxist theory about capitalism and a lot of it has made sense. So I'm going to use this Marxist terms for base and superstructure in our system. So the superstructure is where you have your state ideology, the cathedral, if you will. And the base is these institutions, like the real world, right? You know, the actually existing federal government, the actually existing state government, the actually existing means of production. That's the base. And the superstructure can influence the base. And the base can influence the superstructure. Usually, the superstructure will influence the base towards more crazier things, towards more an ideological, justifiable version of the base, right? This is where you have feminism becomes a thing in the superstructure, so more and more women take up more and more leadership roles in the base. But ultimately, the base can only provide for what can be supported in the real world. So, like, if you get into real radical feminism, like antinatalism, the more that the superstructure tries to promote antinatalist feminism, it will eventually collapse itself because you can't create a base which would actually support something which is so crazy and dysgenic as antinatalism. And this goes into the classic Samhain joke, right? State-enforced, mandated homosexuality. And that would obviously collapse the system because nobody would be born. Anything that's antinatalist will eventually collapse the system. Thus, the superstructure can only go so far, right? You can't run a liberal democracy in sub-Saharan Africa because sub-Saharan Africans, they don't have the human capital to run it. You can't have an actively antinatalist society for very long because the sub-replacement fertility will collapse the society itself. And is our superstructure has grown so radically insane no matter what happens, I personally believe that it'll collapse, right? And other people will be like, well, they'll just get robots to run things and it'll continue. And it's like the active promotion of like forceful dysgenics, negative dysgenics, doing things that are purposely dysgenic will prevent the human capital from creating those robots to try and save itself. Like, we're so far beyond that point to where we'll get robots to like run our feminist society. And you know, there will be some automation, but we're not going to get to the point where it's just going to be like robots are going to run everything, and then the robots are going to go off and be dysgenerate while humans slowly go extinct. That's not going to happen. The American and some extent, right, the globalist superstructure are increasingly out of control and influencing their base to become more and more unstable. And even without views of peak energy, it's very easy to see that this cathedral cannot drift ever so radically indefinitely. And that, like the statue in Daniel with the feet of clay, the body will collapse in on itself. So once you ultimately de-emphasize the family, renounce very basic laws of philosophy like the laws of non-contradiction, and you promote negative dysgenics, the society is going to collapse no matter what you do. I really think it's important to process just how disturbing and disruptive to most people's understanding of the world to think that there's an irrational elite, that they're being controlled by people that would simply walk off a cliff like lemmings and drive them and all of civilization down with them. It's just very, very disturbing. And I understand why people just won't accept that. So often they'll try to construct theories of power and try and frame some kind of higher meaning to the seamless chaos of the elites. The so-called higher level of conspiracy theories or meta-conspiracies, where you have a group of elites who act in a more or less perfect manner and effectively control all major institutions and point them towards a single unitary goal. That's often like kind of cope, where you're comforted in the order. It doesn't matter if that order is evil or it's good. Just the very existence of this, you know, very strong order, this so-called New World Order, right? The Illuminati, or the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or the reptilians, the lizard people, this very strong and almost, well, clearly, for the most part in their worldview, invincible New World Order, it's still comforting because it means that the world is planned, that there's order to everything. And, you know, to some extent, the cathedral is a more advanced version of that meta-conspiracy. And that's where you have a bureaucracy creating a new world order more or less through consensus, as opposed to like this purposeful top-down secret thing. It's just through consensus. It's just arisen through mutual agreement within the educational system, and then it influences the whole superstructure to this consensus towards a new world order. Yet, to be honest, I don't think there ever is a plan, and there ever could be a plan. And it doesn't matter if it's the New World Order, where you have like a secret Illuminati or 33rd degree Masons or these enlightened elders of Zion, or it's the emergent cathedral. And you have all these buzzwords over and over again, like the Great Reset, and, you know, Bush's in the beginning of the 90s, the New World Order itself. Well, these are just the liberal propaganda words of think tanks. All this globalism, you know, all the IMF and all the Rockefellers and all the globalist institutions, of course, as I'm doing the video, I can't remember them off the top of my head, Bilderbergers, these kind of things aren't really expressing any power. They're really just kind of either think tanks, or what they're expressing is propaganda. And it's really just the kind of propaganda you'd get from, like, the Soviet Union. I know I harp on the Soviet Union that much, but I really, really read a shit ton about it. And when I see our world today, I kind of notice all these similarities between the regime in the United States and the Soviets regime. And the Soviet Union was this crazy, insane regime that collapsed. And the United States, under the insanity of progressivism, will eventually collapse as well. So under the Brezhnev era, you have another new world order, right? Actually existing socialism, where we're living in socialism as it is. Like this declining, stagnant world, well, that's actually socialism, bud. We're not working towards socialism now. We already have it. Now we're working towards communism. And that's, when they talk about a new world order and global governance, it's just propaganda in the same kind of level. They're still just really incompetent. And, they probably do want to build a dystopian nightmare. They do want you under social credit. They do want you to live in pods. They do want you to eat bugs. They do want you never to have kids. They do want you never to get married. They do want you never to go to church. They do want you to, watch streaming services and pay for more streaming service than you would on your taxes. But just because they want that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get it. And if they actually tried to force it on people, that it wouldn't collapse the base right away. Because you have to remember, what the base can actively support prevents all these insane goals. And to be honest, normies are gonna buck. No normies have bought fucking Beyond Meat. It's always these weird soy boys that try it once and then they move on. Nobody's going out there and eating Beyond Meat. Nobody's going out there and eating the bugs. The bugs are sitting there on the shelf, and under their insanely long shelf lives, they're eventually rotting, right? Because nobody wants it. People keep driving cars. When they're trying to enforce on people like alternative energy and Tesla and all these things, they can't, everything that they're doing, trying to force austerity justified through global warming, it doesn't seem to be making any difference. Nobody's biting the hook of austerity to save the world for global warming. It doesn't seem like any of these are really going anywhere. And that's because there aren't these fucking alien lizard people pulling strings, right? It's just a bunch of incompetent retards. It's like Fauci was like, oh, the coronavirus is coming? Whatever, I'm just going to keep going out to lunch. Like, he just ignored the email, right? It's just fucking pulling shit out of your ass indefinitely. These people are incompetent. And if you just take off your fear of incompetence, your fear of the lack of control, when you take off those classes and you realize that there can be a lack of control in the elite, it's so blindingly apparent. And why do I think this? That's because I'm a historian. I've looked into the meat processing plant, which real history is in the primary sources. You can follow every single major historical event day by day, or even, the last few decades, hour by fucking hour. And when you do so, you don't see people justifying what they're doing before, like the cryptic influencers, the lizard people, right? And you don't see plans within plans like the Emperor in Dune and the House Harkonnen. You see some kind of dumbass sovereign like George W. Bush or Mikhail Gorbachev planning events for clear goals, or planning events one day at a time. They have clear goals months away. They have vague goals years away. And in non-democratic systems, they have the vague goals year away. In democratic systems, they don't even have those vague goals. They're just fucking walking blindly into the future. And, everybody can go and read books that just explain this in excruciating detail. And two books I will highly recommend to everybody that illustrate this reality are going to be The Last Empire, The Final Days of the Soviet Union by historian Sergei Polkari, and Hitler's War Trilogy by historian David Irving. And you go through these two of the most geopolitically important events in all the 20th century, basically day-by-day actions of Mikhail Gorbachev or Adolf Hitler, the sovereign of the states which controlled them. And in The Last Empire, you watch Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and Khrushchev react to the collapse of the Soviet Union day by day. In Hitler's War, you go through Hitler's decisions through the build-up to the Second War, and then day by day through the Second World War. ultimately until his suicide. And something that's quite enlightening about both of these books is that when you see Hitler and you see Gorbachev, neither of them are like medical political thinkers. Neither of them are like medical historical. They don't, like Hitler will ascribe like, we're going to push the Ukrainians out in 1,000 years, or 1,000, 2,000 years, there'll be historians that'll compare him to like the Aryan invasions of India, where the Aryans pushed out the Dravidians, right? He'll say stuff like that metapolitically, but he won't like, he's not like, fuck, D-Day, it's all over, everything's gonna change, the liberal democracy will conquer itself. And Gorbachev isn't like, well, okay, now there's the coup, it's all over, everything's gonna dissolve. Like, neither of them do that. They're both these pragmatists, and neither of them at any real point realize they're doomed until, like, literally Hitler kills himself and Gorbachev signs a letter to officially acknowledge that the Soviet Union no longer exists. And, you know, Hitler's ordering invisible divisions to try and break through and, like, break the siege of Berlin literally days before he commits suicide, and hoping that the miracle of Brandenburg would repeat in reverse, and that the Western Allies would just basically declare war on the Soviet Union, and the remnants of Nazi Germany would join them and push the Soviets back. He literally fucking believed that. And Gorbachev was like trying to like scraping against the walls completely pragmatically, thinking he would maintain his power, the Soviet Union would continue, and like ultimately what he was thinking is he like call this constitutional convention, and even though Yeltsin and Ukraine and Belarus would leave, it wouldn't matter, because like he would call this constitutional convention, and all these Central Asian states which were loyal to the Soviet Union would just like have equal votes to Russia, even though it's like 60% of the population, and then just outvote Russia, and the Soviet Union would continue. Like they would just abandon like communism, or like keep socialism in like the name somehow. The Central Asian republics would have equal power in a constitutional convention. Then they would just outvote Russia, and then the Soviet Union would continue, and you'd stay the fucking president of the Soviet Union. Like, both of them were just these actors. Neither Hitler nor Gorbachev were insane. They just followed through their doomed goals to the very end without any cynicism. Why would we assume that just because the elites of the modern West, what they want is impossible, that they're not doing the same? That somehow, you know, Macron is cynical, or Biden is cynical. Or, you know, or even worse, they're acting as puppets of the Illuminati, or the lizard people, or, you know, the protocols. Because, I mean, if you really have knowledge of history, I deeply doubt that the world is just a stage. Like, there are bumbling idiots everywhere in history. And there are numerous civilizations and states which have collapsed, and their leaders ignored the signs and causes of their collapses for generation upon generation, far beyond it ever being too late. I mean, the Roman emperors never realized that the Western Roman emperors never realized that they were disintegrating. Like, it was completely, like, not on their minds. I also know that living in the real world, you know, go to your real job and, like, appropriate it onto, you know, as below, so above, right? As above, so below. Go to your real job and see how many of the managers are, like, not qualified to be a leader. See how many of them are incompetent. See how many of them are corrupt. See how many of them, you know, they're just kiss asses. Like, that is the government. It's the same fucking thing. Why should the American presidency, Prime Minister of Britain, the French presidency, why should they be any different? They're just as incompetent as a supervisor you have at your job. In fact, our bureaucracies are probably more corrupt than the private businesses, right? And talking to most right-leaning people in America, whether you're doing so in online circles or you're just talking to somebody on the street, you'll hear this constant refrain that Biden really isn't in control, that the presidency couldn't actually be controlled by a man with dementia. And, you know, you have Moldbug, or ironically Chomsky, will say things like, the president has no power whatsoever. It's all the, you know, Moldbug will say, it's all it's all the bureaucracy, and then like Chomsky will say it's all like the corporations who put special interest in the cabinet or something like that, right? Keep in mind that those people also, they don't think the world is a stage like the New World Order conspiracy theorists, and they're just saying that Biden is a figurehead. Yet it's just as much as coping as saying the New World Order met a conspiracy. Because clearly there has been many, many times in which you've had a leader with dementia. You've had a leader that's mentally insane. You know, as many George Washingtons as there are Caligulas, right? So why shouldn't Biden have dementia and be in control? Really, all you're saying to try and prevent that is sophistry and conjecture. Really, we're fucked because we have a man with dementia in control. And over again, having somebody so incompetent as a leader has adverse effects. And we're really going to see very bad adverse effects if we haven't seen them yet, right? And Trump, you know, he wasn't very competent either. Look at all those leaks that were happening. We know that he was in control and just, like, completely didn't know what he was doing from all those leaks. I mean, there's really three things that are evident. He's making day-to-day decisions which are being acted upon like he really is a sovereign. People are ignoring those decisions, obfuscating them, or poorly enacting them. It's not like, literally like, we are the sovereign bureaucracy. We are cathedral. We do not move when the orange man tells us to move. We don't move for the Democrats. We are, cathedral, bureaucracy, ironclad, right? We are one, we are many, we are cathedral. Like, that doesn't exist. It's just like one incompetent guy who doesn't know what he's doing, and he's trying to move these levers of power, and the levers of power are just ignoring, obfuscating, or poorly enacting those decisions. And if you go to every single president, Biden on down, break down their day-to-day activities, you'll really see that they're the actual president. They're really making decisions. They're just like Hitler and Gorbachev. These decisions are pragmatic, and they're centering around day-to-day, week-to-week problems, and they have kind of clear goals months ahead. And they're building towards these short-term plans, right? Except America's a democracy, so very, at the minimum, the most vague greater plans year to year, if not any at all. And in the midst of the sausage, you will always see this incompetence in all of history. And rightist people on the right, they're going to scoff at leftists who believe that the leaders in democratic republics are just the patsies of the captains of capital. And these captains of capital, like Chomsky's saying, like, all the members of the cabinet, they're in control and they're under the power of the corporations and so on and so forth, right? Obviously, captains of industry are important and they influence and broke power, but they don't have control over the princes and they don't have control over the presidents. If anything, their power is more often broken rather than enforced by the state. And yet many in the right are basically subscribing to the same exact theory reversed. The cathedral is just like the leftist idea that corporations run everything reversed to say that bureaucracies run everything. While bureaucracies, again, are powerful and definitely just as much influential as corporations, they're no by ironclad, invincible organizations. While history is full of would-be reformers being humbled, it's also full of these actual reforms taking place. It's full of bureaucracies withering away on the vine in the face of decline, or bureaucracies withering away in the face of decentralization. The only reason why bureaucracies are getting so much power in democracies is because democracies have their rapid turnover of leaders and that their long-term planning is essentially pointless within that power structure. So bureaucracies pick up the power out of the incompetence of the leaders to a certain extent. But say from now on, the Democratic Party cheats in every election and we're going into like a pre-style like Mexico under PRI, we're going to have a one-party state. The bureaucracy is going to be fucking torn apart, shred to shred by whatever wants. whatever the Democrats want. Just like the bureaucracy in like the Russian Federation today doesn't have that much power, or like Zuma got thrown out, but Zuma was fucking around the bureaucracy in South Africa, right? When you get to that one-party state that supposedly they're trying to create, what really happens is the bureaucracy loses all its power. If anything, this idea of like the party in power and the inner and the outer party that Moldbug is talking about, has nothing to do with the bureaucracy having power. A two-party state or a multi-party state is what gives the bureaucracy power. If there was a one-party state, then the bureaucracy would lose most of the power it exerts within democracies. So overall, not only do I think there is no puppet mastery stuff going on, there isn't even a plan, not even on the vaguest level. The superstructure is just going off of the track because, you know, something's going on, right? Something on a very primal level, right? Either God is punishing us or it's genetic and it's mouse utopia. And the people in charge, they just don't think it's a problem. They're actively supporting it. These people are also crushingly incompetent and they have no idea what they are doing. Not only is this true, but it's easily proven just by looking at the public record. And in that public record, you'll see industry and bureaucracy both trying to exert their influence. And you'll see very clearly the leaders of the governments acting as sovereign individuals and making their dumb mistakes. Why should we look at the catastrophic defeat in Afghanistan and say, yeah, these guys are competent because they have yet to be delegitimized by dissidents, right? It's like, you know, Biden's doing a good job, Cathedral's doing a good job because they haven't been overthrown, right? Not just, like, the collapse isn't going to happen because it hasn't happened yet, right? And they're still in power because my LARP group that nobody pays attention to, that has a really hard to explain to normies political ideology that they don't connect with, it hasn't been able to like become a mass movement and overthrow them. So they're not incompetent, right? They know what they're doing because they aren't overthrown. But really, like, you look at the Afghanistan war and its very existence just is fucking defines incompetence. It went on for 20 years because nobody wanted to even have the competence to end it. They didn't want to reveal how incompetent they are, and they just kept going and losing and losing and losing for 20 years straight. Right? And you know, all kinds of like ridiculously incompetent governments never got overthrown. Look at fucking Saddam. Like, how many times he invaded other countries and got fucking wrecked. Look at, like, his infrastructure is destroyed, right? Completely, like, clown world stupid bullshit. But, like, he gets destroyed from the outside. Look at all over the Arab world. Look at all over Africa. You know, for every tin-bot dictator that's overthrown, one of them just dies of old age and succeeded by another, right? Just because the government hasn't been overthrown yet by your LARP, your insignificant little LARP on the internet, doesn't mean that it's not incompetent. And, you know, perhaps the establishment wants mass immigration to drive down wages and the brain drain from the third world so that the third world can't compete with them. But it might also be that it's not by design. It's just they literally left the tap of mass immigration on, and none of them want to use the political capital to end it. Like, they're not going to waste this political capital because, remember, they're in a democracy. Why would they waste all these short-term resources to end a long-term problem? Democracy is going to foster things like mass immigration to the Great Replacement, and it's going to foster things like 20 years straight of war in Afghanistan because it's so short-term minded. In the United States, it's based on 2-year increments. Fascinatingly short-term minded. So we shouldn't be surprised that they just turn on a tap of mass immigration, never turn it off until the country collapses. because the effort to fix a long-term problem isn't worth burning the oil and, destroying your, using all this energy in the short term, right? In every single democracy ever, kick the can down the road. So why should we expect the destruction of mass immigration to be planned when it makes so much sense under Occam's razor that they literally left the tap on because their system promotes short-term planning. It promotes kicking the can down. It promotes leaving the faucet on until it floods the house. Right? It's so much easier to believe that things are incompetence rather than purposeful destruction towards means that the government in its day-to-day functioning or any institution is incapable of being that competent. Has any state or civilization in history been destroyed purposely from the inside by its own elite for fucking yucks and giggles? I think the answer is a resounding no. So it's safe to say that the current destruction and destabilization of the West is following the same patterns as history and every other previous civilization or state which collapsed. It's self-inflicted through incompetence. Perhaps certain decisions such as like the Great Replacement or promotion of feminism or homosexuality are going to be unique historically. But, we have an industrial civilization and our base is stronger now to support crazier things. And transportation and the industrial civilization mean things like immigration can happen very, very fast. The Great Replacement can happen in 2 generations and the native people become a minority. And no matter how frustrating and horrifying it might be, the reality is that 9 out of 10 or even 99 out of 10 of the examples, the emperor having no clothes and everybody seeing it, doesn't matter. Horrible miscalculation and ineptitude of the state doesn't cause people to rise up and overthrow it in almost any cases. Just because everything is terrible and getting worse doesn't really mean that people will rise up. It's like we will we could collapse without the public ever realizing the danger that they're really in. Or the precipice where they realize the danger is absolutely unpreventable. So even though dissidents on the right now are right and they're being punished, that doesn't mean that it's going to lead to anything. It's probably making this video is ultimately in vain. And I know that's true black-pilled. It's true black-pilled to say that when you rage on your YouTube channel and you're fucking writing away your blog, nobody's going to read it and it's everything you're saying is right and it's still going to collapse. Because states don't collapse because some whistleblower told everybody the government lied. That's liberal propaganda you've been fed your whole life. They collapse because governmental bodies are grotesquely incompetent. I mean, it's not impossible that there will be a revolution or something like that. But I really expect there to be an oblivious Republican and a Democratic Party to exist and preside over the rapid decline of the United States for the foreseeable future. Right? The dissidents didn't end the Soviet Union or the Eastern Bloc. Gorbachev was a retard, and them trying to put through austerity did. That really doesn't mean that the government is invincible. Really, it's far from it. Rather, the populace is just as stupid as the people that are running them. As above, so below. Stupidity everywhere. Now I want to make something straight. When Biden says it's a strength that whites will be a minority, it's probably just a post hoc rationalization out of a cataclysmic series of ineptitudes that left the faucet of unlimited immigration on. When Hillary Clinton says that it's imperative to prevent a white minority rule, that's an ad hoc normalization of the catastrophic ineptitude that led to the current political order. Democracy never promotes long-term thinking. And it's actively indifferent it's not just indifferent to it, it's actively hostile towards it. Why should political actors in the United States shut down the border, restrict immigration because that's a very costly move in the immediate. And it's much easier to destroy future generations and benefit off this 2-year election time cycle than say, okay, we're going to be replaced in 40 years. We're going to be replaced in 30 years. Let's change this, right? Why would you do that? Because there is no benefit within a democratic system to planning towards long term. And like I said before, that's what happened in Afghanistan. They went on for 20 years because nobody sees burning up their political capital in the immediate with the humiliation of a defeat as worthwhile as opposed to benefiting the United States over the long term and just ending the fucking facade. And the entire system and all these parts that are collapsing and pushing decline, they can't be faced by a democratic system. Because a democratic system is like shoving your face to the fucking ground and trying to see the horizon. So our system is it's very predication, it's very base, is going to be corrupted by this insane superstructure and continually pick people that aren't even going to acknowledge that the problems exist. They're going to say through ad hoc and post hoc justifications that the crises and the destruction of the civilization itself is good. So expect our leaders to just say, austerity is wonderful. We love austerity. We love not having oil anymore. We love poverty. We love being replaced. Our leaders are going to embrace the collapse with open arms. They did not engineer this collapse. They did not engineer this decline. They stumbled into it through incompetence, and they're justifying it through their incompetence, and they're falling in love with it. They stumbled into the collapse, and they loved what they stumbled into.